Well, thank you, Julia. That was wonderful. Penny and I got to hang out yesterday in Elk Grove with a few others in the audience, which was wonderful to kick off National Gear Up Week. So those of you connected to Gear Up, Shelley Davis, congratulations. Good to see you again. The great work that's going on here in California and the such. I was over in San Francisco this morning talking to their counselors at 8 o'clock this morning as they were doing an all-day professional development day, and the superintendent came over. So I like capturing and taking advantage of those opportunities. Jackie, thanks for doing all the legwork here and coordinating today and tomorrow. And I'm really looking forward to the conversations and the such. It's great to have my friends from Riverside and Fresno, who you're going to hear from later, who are part of this Fafsa work that started in Chicago in '07 and has begun to expand throughout the country. I never thought I'd go to DC and have to spend like 60% of my time on Fafsa, because back in Chicago we figured out how to do it and it was maybe 3% of my time, and it was like, how do we how do we take this one piece of the college access work and loop it into all of this other all these other steps and the such. So what I'd like to do is just kind of give you a broad overview to set the stage for today, make some comments around FAFSA, make some comments around how it's fitting into conversations throughout this country now around this theory of change around collective impact. And I really feel privileged to be able to spend time with superintendents and mayors and county officials and business leaders, and to really kind of stir the pot up in terms of what's possible. And I'm absolutely convinced, because of the Chicago work, of what can be done. You actually have one of the reports in your folder, the most recent report on college enrollment. I'll make a couple comments on what that report looked like in 2004 when we baselined it. And if you can move a system, and it wasn't me, it was this incredible team that Arnie allowed me to bring together. If you can move the third largest system to literally send thousands and thousands of more kids to college every single year and document it, prove it with NSC data, so that there's no doubt that this is happening. It's not survey data. The power of data systems as we move forward are going to transform all of your work as this continues to develop. And one of the conversations going on inside the department are, what are some of these proof points that where data, third-party reliable data sets, it's part of the reason why state longitudinal data systems have been part of our focus, challenging states to build their own systems. But even those systems for the foreseeable future, as good as they might get, are not going to be good enough, because they're not going to pick up data across state lines. So when your students leave California, how are you going to be able to show that they actually are enrolled, in Nevada or Arizona or wherever they end up going? The NSC becomes one of those tools that people, for the most part, feel pretty comfortable about using to document without dispute in terms of enrollment and continued progress towards their degrees and the such. When I use the word college today, I'm talking about college in terms of 4-year institutions, 2-year institutions, and industry-recognized certificates. This is really, really important because even Arnie's begun to talk about, which I love, helping young people find their passion. And if their passion is fixing automobile engines or air conditioners or where there's an industry with a recognized set of skills and they can get that certificate in less than a year, God bless them. As I told the group yesterday, my air conditioning went out a couple weeks ago and it cost me $450 for the guy to be there for 30 minutes. And I used that example in a speech to the National League of Cities a year ago, and the guy at the end of the speech raised his hand and said, I'm a carpentry teacher at such and such high school, and I make $44,000 a year or something, but I support my family by fixing air conditioners, because in 2.5 months I make $100,000. And I did some quick math to myself and took that $450 times 30 minutes, and then built in an hour of travel time. And if that guy is fixing 5 more air conditioners today, 5 times $450 times 5 days a week, maybe 6, I'm real at $100,000 real quick. Buy a little Freon and some tubes to fix them, and I'm ready to go. So if you're looking for an avocation, maybe air conditioning is the way of the future. But we need skilled folks, right? When our cars break down and whatever. So this whole conversation fits into the president's 2020 goal of moving us back into the #1 spot, but we're not doing that requires something like 12 million additional college graduates by 2020 if you use his number. If you use Lumina's number, we're at 25 million. Now they give the country 5 more years to get that extra 15 million graduates. That's above and beyond what we're producing now in terms of 4-year, 2-year, and certificates. That, in my mind, means that we have to have the systems in place in order to link K-12 with higher ed. And we have to create this fluidity of what's really happening. And we have to begin to challenge, as I tried to do yesterday in Elk Grove, and as I tried to do in front of the counselors this morning over in San Francisco, we have to build the systems, and we have to be smarter about how we go about doing this work. And one of the key ways that we can be smarter about doing this work is using data and arming those of you in the field with key information that can make you much more effective and efficient in how you go about doing your jobs with young people, whether that's formally within the school district or whether that's as part of a Gear Up program, Project Grad, whatever the nonprofit connections might be with the district. I came away from the Chicago experience firmly convinced that the entire Chicago community wanted to support Chicago Public Schools. But what they needed to hear from the Chicago Public Schools was that we had a plan and a strategy. And that their investment, whether it was from the business side or the financial aid office at a higher ed institution or the nonprofit community or the faith-based community, that principal, that administrator, all the way up to Arnie, that we had a strategy. And it wasn't just a random set of activities. And for the most part, what we suffered from, I think, in this college access work is that too often we get really proud of all of our activities, right? We take kids on college trips, and we get mentors, and we get tutors, and we get this, and we get that. And it's like we grab it all. We used to call them Christmas tree programs and Christmas tree schools in Chicago, right? All kinds of shiny ornaments. Some of them are bigger and brighter because there's more money or more volunteers or whatever. But they're all on the tree, but they're not linked together. They're not flashing, together or in sequence. They're all just bright and beautiful. No one is trying to link them, so eliminate the duplication, the replication of the fact that this one kid has gone to St. Mary's College 4 times on a college trip because they're part of Gear Up and they're part of, CTE and they're part of, AP program or whatever. But the kid keeps getting the free trip to St. Mary's because we all, I'm guilty of it. As Julia said, I've been doing this for 42 years. And so I know the game. I've been in your shoes for the most part. But we got to get smarter about it. But what folks in communities want is they want an articulated vision of where we're trying to get to. And they also want honesty about where we're starting from. And so one of the things I love about this theory of change around collective impact is that it calls for ruthless honesty about where you're starting from. How in the heck can any of us get better if we aren't absolutely honest about what's really happening? And not just aggregate numbers, but build the capacity to build the analytics to begin to take those numbers apart. And how are we doing? One of the things you'll see in the Chicago report that's in your folder is beginning to break down those numbers by gender and race and the such, probably categories that you all do. But then what was the most intriguing thing for me was pulling it apart by program. Because when we set off and it was clearly identified that getting a Pell Grant is critical to low-income students going on to higher ed, I didn't want that just to rest in the counselor's lap. I wanted to lay there in terms of their responsibility, but I wanted to help them build a system within their school or within the district so that AVID director, that Project Grad director, that those kids in AP classes, those kids in CTE by program of study, whatever the subgroup was, that they could get their number for their 40 kids, their 50 kids. It all added up to 600 seniors that the counselor was tracking, but it was that this ownership, the sense of overlapping integrated activities and strategies are all pushing on these key data points. And And when we, I hope you're all aware that in in March of this past year, we started posting to our website at FSA by high school the raw FAFSA completion number for every high school in the country, public and private. We don't know the number of seniors in your schools, but you can take that and you can either calculate that by the enrollment in September of your seniors, because every district seems to have a different cutoff date in terms of in Chicago it used to be the 20th day of class, right? That froze positions, that froze all sorts of things. But that doesn't necessarily mean that's going to be the number of graduates that you end up with in May or June or in August, sort of thing. So anyways, but you're being given a number that you can now baseline all of where you're starting from. The challenge we have, as Julio was referring to, is that we still have over 1 million high school students who don't fill out the FAFSA form who we think are eligible for a Pell Grant. 1 million. The national average a few years ago was only 54%. So this is to me, this is one of these metrics for the taking. This is like, who wants to take and own this metric? Because it's directly related, as we all know, to whether those low-income students are going to be able to access not only college, but the potential for choice in terms of institutions that they might be able to consider enrolling in and as such. So this whole collective impact around ruthless honesty, and it's one of the things I really appreciate about working with Arnie, was let's stop playing the games, and we could all tell our stories about, how we calculate graduation rates until the federal government had to step in and say, before we were, Margaret Spellings, and said, enough of this foolishness. We're going to start with a cohort, and people still push back on us in terms of, well, how about this subgroup of kids, and how about that subgroup of kids, and how about fifth year? And we want you to calculate fifth year graduation, and sixth year, and seventh year. Go for it. But you also have to report fourth year, in 4 years. Right? So, but it's a cohort. It's not like February of senior year, 4 months before graduation, that you report your 98% graduation rate, which was not being done accidentally, right? I mean, somebody calculated that my job might be at stake if I report the real rate at 47%. I know how to do that. We'll just measure it a different way. And then we'll pretend like we're measuring it from freshman year of high school. Because if you ask any parent, basically any person outside the educational system in our country, how they think high school graduation rates are calculated, well, it must be entering freshmen in September of their freshman year, and then who graduate? That's their impression. No, yes, that's their impression. So in education, we've gotten really good at the ignorance, if you will, of the general population. That's just one data point. We could tell stories and spend all day telling stories about 100 other data points. So this ruthless honesty, how in the heck are you ever going to, I mean, we're pushing like we need 100,000 new STEM teachers, right? We need 100,000 new minority teachers in the next 5 years. How are you ever going to know whether you reach those goals if you're not really honest about where you're starting from? And so this is something Arnie is just in his blood in terms of this. How do we build the systems so that this work isn't just episodic, and it's because we've got a 2-year grant or a 3-year grant, and we can do it with this subgroup of kids. How about all the kids? What are the systems that are being put in place for all the kids? I shared this morning with the counselors, the College Board did a survey for the first time, I understand, ever, of over 5,000 school counselors last year. They actually have conducted a second one, which they're going to release in the next month or so. And what they were interested in is what's the disconnect between, the verbiage of the district's mission statement. Mission statement in Chicago was prepare all students for success without the need for remediation to be successful in post-secondary education. That was our mission statement. Pretty clear. Probably pretty similar to districts that you're from or familiar with. You have to get the word all in there, right? Because we have to make sure we're inclusive, right? Well, so how does this really play out? So the College Board said, let's survey counselors, because they're the troops on the ground. Let's find out. whether this is really true or not. Well, there's like a 50% difference in this national survey, which, by the way, plays out when they took that survey apart, and I just gave Maureen the California sub-report of that same survey, in terms of what counselors, the mission statement of that district, in terms of what counselors actually see playing out on the ground. In terms of, so are all students who are eligible for rigorous courses, rigorous, whether that's defined as dual credit, AP, IB, whatever, is there a strategy to get every single student in it? Now, you guys are big fans of Avid. I'm a big fan of Avid. We had 40,000 kids in Avid in Chicago for lots of reasons, because we saw it as a core strategy in terms of how we really push this college enrollment. But all too often, Avid across the country is this nice boutique program where people can say, yeah, we have Avid, and they kind of imply, we love to imply things too, that every single kid who wants Avid is in Avid. Is that really true? The counselor said, it ain't true. Isn't that true? We don't have a system to really identify every single student and get every single student into AP courses or dual credit courses or whatever. We don't, it's like whoever comes, whoever signs up. When we run out of money, we run out of money. When we run out of spaces, we run out of spaces, whatever. But part of what's been happening over the last few years is governors, and states and legislatures have been stepping in saying, let's call the cards on some of these questions. So in Arkansas in '07, the state legislature stepped in because they were concerned all too many minority students were being left out of AP classes. So the excuse was, we don't have the money to give the PSAT to sophomores to identify AP potential, right? So the legislature stepped in and said, okay, we'll pay for it. All right, every school in the district next year, you're going to give the PSAT. The number of students identified as having AP potential more than doubled. More than doubled, just the day after they gave that test. And who were those students? You know who those students were. They were minority students, predominantly male, who were being looked over by folks in terms of reaching out to them to encourage them to sign up for AP classes. The same thing happened in Florida over a little bit extended period of time. So my point is that we have to move away from program thinking to thinking systematically about how we address these issues. And that we need then to use data to kind of push what needs to be done. One of the things that you'll see on the Chicago report in your folder is at the very end is we started looking into the subgroups of students. To what extent were those students actually enrolling in college? To what extent were they filling out their FAFSA form? To what extent were they filling out 5 college applications? 70% of students in this country still put only 1 college on their forms in terms of where they're interested in going. 70%. That's a problem. That's a systems problem, right? That counselors shouldn't be expected to solve on their own, but they need to formulate the strategies to bring in the community resources to begin to expand the horizons of those young people, whatever within their school district. So the subgroup analysis as an administrator, running the high schools in Chicago by group, so I could was incredibly important in terms of both verifying whether what we thought was happening, or telling us that it wasn't happening. And I shared this example yesterday, so apologize to those of you who were with me in Elk Grove, but the big come to Jesus for us in Chicago was IB. 33,000 freshmen every year in Chicago. They keep coming, 33,000. Maybe 400 get into IB, right? Some of them are in IB in middle grades. And so, are they going to college? Everyone assumed they were going to college. The counselors, the principals, the teachers, everybody assumed. Ran the NSC data, 20% of them weren't in college. We thought they were at Harvard and Stanford. Where are they? Some of them weren't even enrolled in college. Now, For low-income students, there could well be financial reasons, there could be family, could be life issues sort of thing, but no one would have guessed that 20% of those kids that we had just invested this significant amount of resources in weren't even in college, much less not in highly selective institutions and the such. And so College Match began to become, it wasn't just a matter of getting them there. It goes back to helping young people find their passion and getting them into the right institution and using data to help verify whether that was happening. But building the ownership for changing anything on the broader community. So with those IB students, what we found out was that their writing skills weren't quite up to par. They're brilliant, brilliant young people. But Stanford was rejecting them because Stanford is saying they're competing with young people from across the world. And you've got brilliant kids. The best schools in Illinois are Chicago public schools at the elementary level, the middle school level, and the high school level. Anywhere in the state, the best schools are there. But there's still, some of these young people in the best programs just weren't able to capitalize on the opportunity. And so it led to bringing in the community. In this case, the community was the University of Chicago and DePaul University to start a one-week summer college application set of workshops for those IB students, and to bring in English professors and writing professors from the University of Chicago to work with them on their personal statements and their essay questions and the such. But it took us a year to get beyond, be able to move forward in being able to do that because the staff was in denial that this could not be happening. Johnny told me he's at Berkeley. I know he's at Berkeley. He showed me his acceptance letter. You know, I know he's there. He's not there. He's over on 49th Street with his mama. You might want to call him up or go over there and talk to him because he's not in California. So anyways, but the subgroup analysis, whether it was with the AVID kids, whether it was with the CTE kids, by program of study, not keep drilling down further and further. What's happened when you build that ownership is you begin to move this tremendous number of students from the middle up into the upper parts of the system. And those young people then start to move your numbers. In Chicago, as I start out, 3,800 more students from the class of 2011 are in college as compared to the class of 2004. It's a 47% increase. In a system, you know, that large, that's not insignificant. It's not moving from, yeah, we doubled, we went from 3 to 6. No, Chicago went from 8,000 to 12,000. And it keeps going up. And because the responsibility led by the counselors is shared across all the other program directors and then supported by the community resources in strategic ways. So that when those FAFSA completion workshops happen, if a Chase Bank sends 30 volunteers to 10 different schools, and each one of those is working with 5 kids on a Tuesday night, the district has a system in place to report back to Chase. Yeah, 95% of those kids that were worked with 2 nights ago, not 2 months ago, 2 nights ago, filed their FAFSA, and it's been accepted on the computer at the Department of Education. Down the hallway from my office, because that's the only thing that matters. That's the only thing that matters is that computer, not whether the kids said they sent it in. So, real quick on FAFSA, how am I doing on time?
You've got about 19 minutes.
5 minutes plus questions, including questions. Okay, all right.
Yeah.
So on FAFSA, we figured out in 2007 that if the state scholarship entity, and this was our conversation 2 years ago, held the information on who had a completed FAFSA, I knew in Chicago, every single student in Chicago whose zip code started with 606 lived in the city of Chicago. So if the state entity could send me the list of names for every student in 606, I could match those students to their public high school. And by matching them to the high school, I would know then which students didn't have a FAFSA. That's all we did. It was like information sitting right in front of my face, and like no one had dawned on them that this could be really, really powerful information to school counselors, because it would make their jobs that so much more efficient if they knew exactly which kids, rather than hoping that those kids show up tonight at 7 o'clock with all the right paperwork, with their mama to help sign, you know, right? And then you get one of them to show up. Mm-hmm. No, I knew 47. I knew their phone numbers because I'm the district. I've got that information. I can call them and reach out to them. You're going to hear the stories. Gloria's nodding her head. Gloria was so eager to get going on this sort of thing because we didn't roll it out the first year until like June. But she still went after those kids who didn't have a completed FAFSA form and said, now I know exactly who they are. And I can compare what they told me with what's on the computer at the department, sort of thing. And so my goal is, we're ramping this FAFSA verification up, because when you get that information by name, and a district can then work with community partners, we're working on the legal issues of that still, but I think we're going to make it, that you can make huge gains, real gains, percentage gains in the first year of this effort. But you have to have a strategy, and you have to have a coordinated, plan in order to use those Chase volunteers or those Project Grad volunteers or staff and the such. And you can move this metric significantly. Is it the silver bullet? No, but it certainly is a key in terms of opening up the door of possibilities for the young people that walk through the counselors' offices and are in our schools every single day. So my goal, we're expanding that project. We're adding, some of you might be affiliated with some of the districts. San Francisco, as I mentioned, I was just there this morning. They're joining the expansion of this verification, as is Elk Grove, where I was yesterday, by student name. Now, from a national perspective, that's great. Now we have 110 districts. Problem, we have 16,000 districts in the country, public, and we have about 9,500 private high schools in the country. So from the federal perspective, I've got to create a system for 25,000 school districts, not schools, school districts. But this is where I think technology we would like to get to in terms of creating a technological solution that would allow and be flexible to give because we confirm almost overnight students' filing of a FAFSA. And so if you can give real information in real time and feed it back, that's what we want, right? Whether it's on the FAFSA form or whatever it is. So anyways, we're going to expand it. We've got some great support from the Lumina, Gates, and Kresge foundations. We're bringing most of the original districts along together with these 92 new districts together for a couple days in Indianapolis in October. And more than anything, I'm hoping is as much the data as it is kind of beginning to form a learning community across the country. And so that Riverside and Fresno have been wonderful about just sharing how they train their counselors, how they trained outside volunteers. Here's the poster we used for our FAFSA completion workshop. Here's how we did this, how we did that. And so we just build this body of evidence, or we call them artifacts, that others can utilize and such. So this project is embedded over at Financial Student Aid, Federal Student Aid, FSA, because they're the ones in charge of the FAFSA form. They the loudest cheer Arnie gets in his speeches is the fact that since we've been in DC, we've moved from 6.2 million FAFSA completions a year to almost 10 million. So almost 10 million. But we still have this gap. We still have this 1 million+ high school kids who should be tapping into this. But that gets, for those of us who've been in the trenches, there's the easy work on top where we can make that easy phone call and tell the parent, you know, get your kid to come in with these documents tonight and I'll help them fill out the FAFSA. But then there are the harder conversations in terms of families who don't trust the federal government or don't trust the school district or have these concerns. And so how do you match the data with and translate it into action? So why are we measuring any of this if we don't intend to act on it, is my point. And so every time I meet with school district people, they are, you know, they're churning data this way and that way and inside out and left and right and blah, blah, blah. But my concern is, and what part of the reason going back to collective impact that I love this theory of change is there's only 5 key components to that philosophy. And it basically tells folks to simplify the data part. And so what you have across the country are conversations from readiness for kindergarten up through post-secondary graduation occurring, and 5 or 6 benchmarks between readiness for kindergarten and post-secondary graduation. 3rd grade reading, Balfanza's work at Johns Hopkins on the middle grades and ABCs, if you've heard of that. 8th grade algebra, ACT's focus on correlating 8th grade success to high school graduation. 9th grade on track comes out of the consortium at the University of Chicago. FAFSA, 10th grade on track is emerging now. But you don't want a lot of those indicators. You want to rally resources around key research-based indicators that will lead to this outcome of high school graduation, post-secondary enrollment, and post-secondary completion. So I'll be here all day. I'll look forward to the conversations as they unfold over the course of the day, and we'll take a few questions and then.
So we have about 10 minutes for questions for Greg, and then, as he said, he'll be here all day, but let's take advantage of this.
Yes?
We're wondering about the DOE FAFSA completion tool, where you can look by high school the number of students that have completed the FAFSA, and it only tallies students.
Buffy, would you mind just
sorry,
amplifying so that, because we're videotaping so that people can hear your question.
Sorry.
And why don't you identify yourself as well? I mean, stand up, Buffy. Yeah, try it.
I'm Buffy Tanner from College Options up in Redding, Farnard, California.
Okay.
And we're wondering about the DOE FAFSA completion tool, where you can look up by high school and see how many students have completed the FAFSA, and wondering why there's the cutoff of 18-year-olds and under, and 19-year-olds aren't measured. We're seeing a lot more 19-year-olds in high school, particularly males.
Right. So when you deal with a federal bureaucracy, somebody has to make a decision that affects the entire country, and a reasonable decision. So I mentioned earlier that we want districts and communities to be measuring their 5th-year graduation rates and their 6th grade graduation rates and the such. So a decision was made at FSA to draw the line at 18 years. We have no idea, again, who those 19-year-old graduates are by name. You do. And if this question gets raised every time I talk about the project, if you can send, I'll give you my card, you can send me an email sort of thing, I'll pass it on to the right people at FSA. I don't know, they would have a better sense of how deep the issue is in terms of percentage. But that decision was also made in conjunction with researchers at IES, so our research unit, in terms of what is a reasonable cutoff sort of thing. Can it be adjusted to 18 years and 6 months or 18 years and 8.2 months? I don't know. But that's, you know, it wasn't meant to not recognize that the work. It's more, how do you create a national baseline that's very clear and the such. So.
Why is there a cutoff at all? I mean, if someone's registered as a senior in a high school, why was there, what's the rationale?
Because then, if you're giving that high school rate, you start to pick up folks who graduate from that who didn't graduate with that cohort of students, but graduated from that high school, and they might be 21 and said, "Oh yeah, I graduated from West High School." So they check West High School, implying that they're part of this current year's cohort. So we can talk about it, but it's, so, yes?
Richard Duarte from Ventura. Options or strategies for undocumented students?
Well, hopefully what the president did a few months ago helps a little bit there. And the biggest impact we had in Chicago was by putting on counselor teams a college graduate who, and districts are doing this, you know, they call them coaches or advisors in this different formats. The most significant impact of moving FAFSA completion college enrollment by a factor of 4 over any other strategy, over AVID, over IB strategy, AP strategy, was adding that person to the counselor team and making sure we matched by race and ethnicity so that the person being hired could tell their story to first-generation African-American students on the west side of Chicago as a college graduate to say, hey, I did this, and this is my story, this is my journey, and if I did it, you can do it. It's not to say the counselors weren't effective, but having that near peer, that 23-year-old, that 24-year-old, first or second job, who still absolutely believes in the potential of the kids in the high school that they're assigned to, that's really important, what I just said in terms of absolutely believes in the potential of those kids, was by far, and we did this in 60 high schools, and they were mostly neighborhood high schools, and so this impact, I would argue, was the main contributor, and Chicago Public Schools is able to document this by high school. So this report that you have, this same report was produced for every single high school. And the research team that I had under me would go out to principals a couple times a year, and we would discuss this data in the context of their program strategies and taking into consideration all the other factors, you know, the community factors and the resources that they had available. But when you can produce, so this report was also done for the AVID program, for the CTE program, for the IB program. And when you can begin to cut the data like this and really look to the subgroups of students within a program by school, then you can really, really dovetail data with programmatic strategies in really powerful ways.
I have one last question.
I'm Monica Montenegro from the East State Consortium Council. Do you have any data that shows the percentage of students who are eligible for Pell Grants out of the 10 million students who completed the FAFSA actually get the Pell Grant? Yeah,
so what's emerged at the department between our research entity, IES, and FSA has put in place a data unit itself just in the last year, are beginning to raise these types of questions, right? So now what are these correlations? And can we create systems that link FAFSA completion with the amount of aid that they're receiving from the federal side, the loans that they're taking out from the federal side and the such, and begin to create another set of insights. For us, it gets into this great concern around debt and quite honestly, the lack of financial literacy that exists in this country, not just with low-income families or students who are trying to put together their financial aid package, but I could tell some personal stories in my family. I have a brother who's a doctor who, if I told this, had time later to tell his story, it would just illustrate the lack of financial literacy in this country at all levels. At all levels. This is a huge issue, and I think part of where will be some of the studies going forward will be linking post-secondary enrollment with FAFSA, with loans, grants, and the such, and trying to push that information back as to arm school personnel and nonprofit personnel with, you know, information around what's happening in their schools and their communities around basic financial decisions and the such. And with the average debt being what, $24,000, $25,000 a year, this becomes will become more and more critical. So.
Well, join me all and thank Greg. He'll be here.